We're just gonna wait a couple minutes while everybody gets onto the live. So I'm sure you guys saw in the post, but we are going to be doing a pointillism impressionism piece today. I'm really excited to be sharing that with you. The inspiration comes from this photo that I had taken. This is just a photo of some flowers, and then I stylized it to be pointillism and impressionism. So if you guys follow along, we're going to be making this piece. So my painting surface is 8 by 10. This is Bristol board. It's pretty efficient to use as a painting surface. It retains the paints without them leaking through, which is a really cool feature. So we're just gonna start out, hopefully you guys all have your supplies out, but we're gonna start out with our primary colors. So put a little bit of blue, red, and yellow on your palette. And don't put too much because you can always add more, and it's best just not to waste your paint. So this is just a good idea in general, to just start with a little bit. And then we're also going to use white. Those three primary colors in white are able to make literally any color. So we're going to learn a lot about color mixing today, which will be a really fun part of this class. So to get started, before we actually start painting, we're going to start sketching this photo. So when you're sketching something like this for an impressionist painting, not every single detail is going to be super important, just the larger shapes. So take note of what some of the larger flowers are, what their shapes are like. Just take note. So once you notice the different flowers on the picture, move to your painting surface, whatever that may be. And we're gonna start off by drawing the mason jar that's holding the flowers. And so the top of the mason jar is about halfway through what our surface is gonna be. So make a little mark about halfway up your paper. And we're just gonna start by drawing that basic shape of the mason jar. Just do super light sketched lines. And as you're sketching, if you're struggling with getting like certain angles, a really good trick is something I call the pencil trick. I take my pencil at the angle of whatever line I'm drawing, and I carry it over to my page. So I have slightly too much of an angle there. I'm gonna straighten it out a little bit. So that's just a good trick to know. So your mason jar in the center of your page is just gonna look something like that. Again, it's a loose, light sketch. So then we're gonna identify some of these larger flowers that are pretty prominent as our basic base point, our guideline. So we're gonna start with this really large flower in the center. So the bottom of the petal kind of reaches over the tip of the mason jar. So we can start drawing just a rough outline of the shape of this flower. It's gonna look something like that. I think I made mine slightly too large. Totally okay if you did the same. I'm just gonna cut it down a little bit. You want to make sure that there's still space at the top of your paper for the rest of the flowers. So just make sure you're not drawing too large, or else that's gonna be a problem later on. So that's a rough outline of that flower. And again, this sketch is just super loose and rough because when you're doing impressionism and pointillism, what's gonna matter more is your light sources. So we're not even gonna pay attention to outlines really. So I'm gonna draw this flower here next. And this is just kind of a half circle, a rounded half circle, and it overlaps the side of the mason jar. So then I'm gonna draw this one next. Same thing, a half circle. And then I'm gonna draw this one down here. This one is the lowest. A way you can check the angle is by just taking your pencil and checking the angle here, seeing if that angle is correct. And you can just draw that in. And there's a curved line for the stem. We can keep track of that. So I'm just gonna give you guys a second to catch up. So then I'm probably going to focus on this flower next. It's relatively close to this one, so we'll use that as like a guide point for where we're drawing our flower. And again, we're not even drawing petals on all of these, just a rough outline. And so this flower is the next one that I feel like is really large, and it'll give us a guide point for our tallest flower. So I would just draw a rough outline, and if the petals have a lot of distinctive shape to them, you can draw that in. But that flower is going to look something like that. And then there's a little petal sticking out over here. So now we're just filling in details of other flowers that we see. I see this pink flower right here. I'm going to draw that one in. The stem. You can start adding the stems to some of the flowers that we've already drawn. So just keep working on this rough outline. Yours doesn't have to look exactly like mine. Just try to get as close to the photo as possible. But at the same time, this isn't a realism drawing, so it's not going to matter too much in the end. You're still going to like the result of your painting. And so I see there's like 3 flowers in this negative space right here. So I'm going to sketch some of those flowers in. And then there's one big one over here. And then we have another one, pretty large near the bottom. So these flowers don't touch each other, which means I probably drew this one too high. So I'm just gonna change that a little bit so these two have space between them. I'm gonna draw in this leaf right here. All right, so if your drawing looks something like this, it's a good basic start. You're doing good so far, so bear with me. We also have this flower out here, so I'm just gonna sketch that in last right now. This is just our reference photo, so if you wanna alter the composition by adding a flower here or there, or like adjusting your drawing, you totally can. I'm gonna add in this extra little leaf over here. And there's a couple buds I see in random areas. So I'm pretty content with the way my drawing's looking so far. So after we get that portion of the sketch in, I'm just gonna start drawing the stems inside of the mason jar. A good starting point, instead of drawing each individual stem, is to clump together this big chunk of stem and then go from there. So it's kind of like a triangular shape. So that's a little clump of stems. And then we have a couple other stems. So we'll draw these ones more individually. And there's one larger one in the corner here. And then I'm going to start adding some differentiation in this area right here that we had accounted for some stems. And then I'm just drawing a rounded line to show the dimension of the glass at the bottom of the mason jar. If you guys have any questions, I can't see my phone screen, but I can see my computer screen in front of me, which is also streaming the live. So feel free to ask any questions and I can answer them along the way. So I'm gonna give you guys a couple minutes to just keep sketching, because I know I went through that pretty quickly, but just make sure you're looking at your reference photo and don't get too focused on detail, because that's really not gonna matter too much in the end. So hopefully this is going good for everyone. A last part of the drawing that's going to be important is this background here. So in order to get an accurate depiction of that, you're just going to take your pencil and do that same pencil trick that I showed you earlier. So just continue the line and try to get that same angle. And then you can do the same thing to the other part that's going the opposite direction. And then this line is just vertical, straight up and down. Yes, I'm totally gonna give you a couple minutes to catch up. So I'm just gonna pause right now and let you guys catch up. But again, the sketch is just super loose and light. Some interesting things about Impressionism, I'm just going to talk to you guys in the couple minutes while I'm letting you catch up, is Impressionism and Pointillism are late 19th century artistic movements, and the whole focus of Impressionism is to capture light, contrast, shadow, and color. So when you're working in Impressionism, lines and outlines aren't going to matter as much, which is why the sketch is like so loose and light. Is just because individual lines aren't our focal point. What's our focal point is like where that light is going to be, where that color is going to be. So that's just like a little background on that. And then pointillism is essentially dots with paint. And the reason why this is going to be both pointillism and impressionism is because if you do an entire painting in pointillism, it's probably going to take too long for this workshop. So we're going to be doing pointillism in the sense that we're going to be creating dots on our paper, but instead of like individual small dots, it's going to be like small brush strokes, which we'll get to later, obviously. So hopefully everybody's doing good with the sketch and feeling caught up. I really enjoy doing these live streams with you guys because it gives everybody a chance to just spend some time doing something relaxing and fun. And I love being able to share things that I've learned on my artistic journey with you guys, which is super, super fun. Oh, I definitely did this exact same sketch a couple days ago. So if I went through it pretty fast, it's probably because I did the same sketch for our reference photo painting. But I'm sure you guys are doing a super great job on this. Is everybody feeling okay about the sketch to start moving on to the painting? Or just let me know in the comments and we can start doing a little more. I think the comments are slightly delayed from my live stream, so if my response to your comments is taking a while, that's probably why. Thank you. Okay, so everybody's feeling good with the sketch? Okay, perfect. I'm super excited to actually start on the painting with you. So a lot of times when you're doing paintings, you'll do something called like a prematura, where you'll cover like the entire canvas or painting surface with one color. But since we're doing pointillism, we're just gonna work section by section for this painting. So I think something that will be good to focus on first is the white flowers, just because it can be really easy to just clump white as one color. But white has a lot of tone, it has a lot of dimension, and there's actually a lot of like green tones and blue tones within the white of this flower. So I personally am going to work with a flat paintbrush, but a rounded paintbrush totally works too. I actually might switch off a little bit, but I'm gonna start with flat. I just love flat paintbrushes for some reason. So for pointillism on my flat brush, I'm gonna be using this corner of the brush to create my marks. But if you were using more of a rounded tip brush, you'd probably do strokes more similar to this. So the first color I'm going to create, so I'll just center the palette a little bit more so you can see it, is going to be kind of like a green, yellow, creamy white color. So in order to do that, we're gonna scoop up a tiny bit of yellow and then an even smaller amount of blue, so barely any, and mix those two colors together. So it's gonna be kind of like a pea green color. It's gonna be super thin. There's gonna be barely any of it. And once you do that, you're gonna take a bigger chunk of white paint and you're gonna mix that white into it. I like to fold my paint. Instead of scrubbing around, I like to take my brush and just kind of like fold the paint together when I'm mixing color. And I'm gonna add even more white than that, because again, this is a color that's gonna be in our white tones. So keep folding that paint. So it's gonna look something like this, kind of like a tan, white, creamy green color. Don't necessarily know what you call that, but it's gonna look something like this. And you're gonna add, just like dip your paintbrush in the water really quickly and just mix in some water. So once we've done that, this color, if we look at the photo, is gonna be the middle white color that covers a lot of the flowers. So as I'm like tapping on these flowers, see how you can't really see the paint on them because it's the same color. So we're gonna start with this outside flower, and we're just gonna be making these little dot marks. And once you see the white start to transition to a darker color, you're gonna stop. So this light color is gonna cover about half the flower and then kind of stagger in at a couple different points. So that's gonna look something like this. So that's a good base point, a good starting point. I'm gonna plug the same color into this flower up here, which would be this flower on the reference photo. Again, just little dots. Grab a little more paint on your brush, and I'm gonna focus on this center flower, which is gonna have probably the most detail of any of my flowers. There's some dark in this petal here, so I'm leaving that blank. And don't worry too much about it being too perfect, because acrylic dries really fast. So if you do too much of a color or too little, you can easily just add more or cover it up with a different color. So just try to find that middle tone as you're working through this. There's a little bit on this one. This petal's a little darker. It's covered by a shadow. So that's gonna look something like this. So our next white flower is going to be this top one. And same thing, just find that middle tone white. It's not the brightest parts, it's not the darkest parts, it's just that part, that color, that tone that's like right in the middle of all of the above. And just keep making those dabbing pointillism strokes. I think this is more pointillism and impressionism, because in pointillism, typically your dots are like a little bit more concise and small, but I kind of like the look of strokes and dots all in one, so that's what we're doing today. And then this leaf up here has some of that same color in it, or petal. And then we have some more over here, which would be this flower petal area. And then if we go over here, this flower is covered by a cooler shadow, so it's gonna have a lot less of this warmer color, because our light source is coming in from this direction. So that's where the warmest colors are gonna be, and the coolest colors are gonna be coming from this direction. But it has a hint of it on some parts of the petals, but it's just gonna have less than some of the other ones because it's a cooler shadow there. And same thing for this bottom one. It's just gonna come in a little bit right here. And then this one has a good portion of this color that we mixed, so we'll add a little bit more to this flower over here. And those are essentially all of our large white flowers. There's another one here, kind of behind this one, that we didn't necessarily draw in, but you can just dab some of that color just because it's kind of behind it. Same, there's a little bit right here of that color. So anywhere you see that color, even if it's not inside of lines or inside of a flower, you can just add a touch of it. Like I even see some in this pink flower that we drew over here. So I'm just gonna add a tiny bit into that pink flower. So anywhere you see this color at this point, you can just add a tiny bit of it in. So hopefully we're all on track and our painting's looking something like this. I'm gonna give you guys a second to finish with this color before I teach you how to mix the next one. Again, if you guys have any questions, need me to re-explain something, just leave it in the comments. The reason I'm going kind of fast through this is because Instagram Live gives us a max time of 60 minutes. So we have to try to get this done in an hour. So we'll see how it goes. I think we should be good, but that's why I'm moving at a slightly faster pace. Okay, so if everybody's feeling pretty caught up, hopefully, we're actually gonna use this same cream color we mixed, but we're gonna add some different colors to it to make it that darker tone white. And we're gonna do our lightest tones last in the end. So we still have some of this color left. What I'm gonna add to it is a tiny bit more blue to cool it down. And the shadows have even like a slight purple tone to them. It's like a mostly green, slightly purple tone. So we're gonna add mostly blue, again, barely any blue, a tiny, tiny dot of red, just to give it that kind of purple tone. And then we're gonna add a little bit more yellow. I kind of added too much there, so I'm gonna add a little bit more blue again to give it that like green feel. And this is gonna be more of like a sage, foresty, green color. And I think the reason that green is so prevalent in this specific reference photo in our whites is just because the stems are green. So I think the white is kind of just like bouncing off that color and reflecting it. And so we're gonna see green in a lot more places. So it's gonna look something like that, but we're gonna add more white to it. It's not gonna be as light as the initial color that we mixed. All right, so it's gonna look something like a sage green color. And if you put dots of it in different areas, it should match up to the darker color in your flower. Mine's not quite there yet, so I'm gonna add a little bit more blue and a little bit more red to give it more of the gray purple look. So just keep mixing until you feel pretty comfortable about that color. And you can just keep testing it on your paper where the dark parts of the white are. I'm adding more yellow. Okay, so now it's less green, or I mean less of a sage muted green. I think I just added too much white. So this color is gonna look something like this. Hopefully you guys have mixed something similar. If it's not perfect, that's okay. So you're just gonna add a dab of water like we did the first time. And we're gonna start adding this into our flowers. So for this guy, there's a little bit of this, and again, this is the darkest part of your white. We're gonna make one more middle tone, but this is just to start seeing that contrast. So we're gonna add some of this into the darkest areas that we see on these flowers. So it's just gonna be a little bit on each flower. It's gonna come in here on this guy and around on the side. And that's this flower we're working on. And then we're gonna move up to this flower. This one's pretty prevalent with green, so we're gonna cover most of it with that green color. And then we're gonna add a little bit underneath here. And again, just wherever you're seeing this darker shade of white is gonna be this green color we just created. So for this flower, there's a lot of differentiation between each individual petal as far as contrast is concerned. So that's where we're gonna put our focus. And I'm just kind of going full circle, moving from my flowers on the left to my flowers on the right. So I'm gonna skip the pink flowers. I don't really see this color in any of them. And I'm gonna move to this side. And this is gonna have some more blue in it, the flowers on the cooler end that I talked about later on, but we can just add this green in wherever we see it again. I'm gonna add a little bit more water to mine. If your brush strokes are kind of looking like splotchy or weird, you're gonna have to mix a little bit more paint or add a little bit more water to your pre-existing paint if it's drying out at all. We're gonna add some in this flower here. And then finally, we're gonna come to that big flower in the center, and we're gonna add some of that green to it, wherever you see it. Just trust your instincts. Wherever you feel like you see the color, just add a couple dabs in there. So it's gonna look something like this at this point. I'm gonna give you guys a second. So the next step, we're gonna create that darkest kind of like bluer shadow that's in this flower and this flower, and then tiny dots in the other ones. So we're just gonna take that same color that we already mixed and add more blue to it. And if it's looking, well, just test it. I actually feel like that's pretty accurate, pretty close. I'm just gonna add slightly more white to it. So all we did was add a little bit more blue to that color to get that cooler look. And I'm gonna start adding that in this flower here for some more contrast. And I see it in this flower a lot too. A little bit over here. Some here. So just add that wherever you feel like you see it. And even if it's not in a certain spot, if you just love the way this color looks, you can add a tiny bit of it if you want. So then it's gonna be something like that. We're not really using that color much, pretty simple. So now for this flower and this flower, I'm gonna add some more white to this color that we had just mixed. That way we have a cooler, lightest tone. We're gonna do pure white in some of these other flowers, but this one, since it's underneath a shadow, is not gonna be pure white. So we're just gonna add white to this color and it almost be pure white, but not quite, and put that in the lightest areas of these flowers on this side of the picture. Gonna add it to this flower over here. Tiny bit to this one. And finally, a small bit to this center flower that we're giving the most attention to so far. And so that's all the areas where we have that cooler white. Now we're gonna focus some attention to the stems. So I'm gonna give you guys a couple seconds to just finish working on those white flowers. And then we're gonna move on to the stems. Okay, so if we're gonna start mixing the color for the stems, we're just gonna create a new color section. We're gonna add some blue and then a substantial amount of yellow. Blue is one of the strongest pigments, so always start with less blue and then you can add more later on. So we're just gonna be mixing like a stem green color right now. We're not adding white to it yet. And make sure that you have a paper towel that you're wiping your brush off in between. Sorry if I haven't explained that. I'm gonna move it up here. That way you guys can see how often I'm cleaning my brush in between color switches. So this stem green, we're gonna test on just like a couple different areas. And it's pretty accurate to the color. So that's going to be probably, I would say 3/4 yellow and 1/4 blue, or 2/3 yellow, 1/3 blue, something like that, just depending on like what brand of paint you have and what it's looking like. It's gonna be like a pea stem green. So then I'm gonna start, and again, just start from one side of my painting to the other and identify where my stems are located. So this stem over here, I'm gonna start dotting in, and it kind of wraps behind this flower. And we're just doing that same dotting motion. If you're using a flat brush like me, really be using the tip for this part because you don't want too large of dots along your picture. It'll kind of create confusion and make the stems look like they're another flower. So keep it pretty thin, but it's okay if they're kind of abstract and not perfectly straight, because that's definitely not necessary. And this little bloom over here is mostly this green color. I'm just gonna fill in most of the green places with this color, and then later on we're gonna add a little bit of yellow to it to add more dimension. So this guy I'm just gonna fully cover in that green color for now. And same with this little bloom back here. So any blooms that you drew in, I would definitely use this color on. Bloom stems. And so there's another stem coming along here that overlaps the flowers leading up to this flower, this stem right here. So just pay attention, there's some leaves uprooting off of that stem. So I'm just using my eye and seeing where this green color might go. So there's this leaf here in between these two flowers. I'm gonna try to get that leaf in along with its stem. And then we're gonna move over to this guy over here. And we have another little bloom over here. The stem of this pink flower here is pretty thick, so I'm adding a little bit thicker layer there, and then just making my way down. So wherever you see this color, you're just gonna add it in. And then this area, kind of behind some of the flower sketches we have, is just gonna be like back stems. We didn't necessarily draw them in, but we're just gonna add some of that color back here because all of those stems overlapping is just making that whole general area appear to just be like a green block of color, which we'll add more dimension to later. But this is a good, definitely a good basis. So that's gonna look something like this. Once you've drawn those stems in, I would move on and start doing the stems inside of the mason jar. Same thing, just dots of paint. I'm gonna have to mix a little bit more of my paint. Just a little bit more yellow, a little bit more blue. To create that same color again. You don't want this to look like watercolor. You want it to look like thick paint. So just make sure you have enough paint on your palette at all times. And this general area just has a lot of green in it, but wherever you identify this pea green color in the stem, dab it in, and then we're gonna create that darker stem color later on. See like a leaf in this area of the mason jar, so I'm gonna add some of those leaves in. So it's gonna look something like this. And that's gonna be the general shape of your stems. So the next step is gonna be pretty easy. For these stems, you're just gonna take the same color that you already have and add a good amount of blue to it. Because this is gonna be that darker color in your stems. So I need to add a little bit more blue. So this is gonna be more of a blue-green instead of a pea green. And start getting some of those dark areas of the stem drawn in now. And this can be scattered. It doesn't necessarily have to go all the way up one whole stem. Just wherever you see dark patches in each individual stem, you can add some of this in and it'll give you that dimension. I'm gonna add a little bit more water to my color. I see some dark in some of the stems near the top part of the image as well. So I'm just, wherever I see it, gonna add in this dark color. This leaf over here that we were working on earlier definitely has some dark tone to it. So I'm gonna add some in there. And then this bud over here that we drew earlier also has a lot of dark contrast areas in it as well. So it's gonna look something like this. Once you do that, I'd clean your brush off again, dab it on that paper towel just to try to remove excess paint. And then we're gonna create the lightest green color for our stems. This is gonna be our final color. So we're gonna take a chunk of yellow and a new part of the palette and take some leftover from this green color and mix it in with that yellow. And then we're gonna take a chunk of white and mix that with the yellow. And it's not quite green enough yet, so I'm just gonna add a little bit more of this green color. And you might just have to grab more blue if you don't have enough left over. I don't really have enough left over to grab some, so I'm just gonna add some blue. And this is gonna be our lightest stem color, which is gonna be found in this stem over here. There's gonna be a little bit over here, some in the middle of your picture. So just wherever you see it, we're gonna start adding that lightest stem color in. And this is just gonna give our stems a lot of dimension and that like pretty impressionist look. There's a little bit in here I see. And if you guys wanna add any color a little bit more than I'm adding or in a different spot of your picture, you totally can. I'm working on these buds on this half right now and just adding little dabs of paint to these guys. And then this center stem here is pretty light, so I'm gonna get some more of that and add some lightness to it. This stem over here, which would be this stem, also pretty light. I'm gonna add some of that lighter color. And then we have a stem over here that's pretty light. So yeah, just keep plugging that light stem color in wherever you see it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. This is Impressionist. We're just doing little swabs of color here and there, brush strokes. So once we've done that, we are actually going to take some time to focus on our pink flowers because we haven't really spent much time on those. So I would take your painting plate, and the first thing I would do would be in the same way that we started with a middle tone for our white flowers, we're gonna create the middle tone for these pink flowers, which is like this blush kind of rose color. So we're gonna start with a little bit of red, and then we're gonna add, I would say 2/3 white, 1/3 red. And then they're kind of peachy, so we're gonna add a tiny bit of yellow to them. Barely any, just a dab. But at the same time, they have like a coolness to them. So we're gonna add about the same amount that we did yellow, we're gonna add blue. We don't want this to look like bubble gum. We want it to look like a dusty rose color, which is why we're muting it down with the blue to give it more of like a gray tint to it. So it's gonna be kind of like a mauve purple. And again, you can just test it on your paper. What I have right now is pretty close, but I'm just gonna add a little bit more yellow to it and a little bit more white to it. And test that. So once you've created that kind of mauve purpley color, you're gonna put that wherever you see it in the pink flowers. So I'm gonna start with this pink flower off to the side. And this pink flower overlaps this stem that I drew, so I'm just gonna go right on top of it and cover it up. So any places where these pink flowers overlap, you can just take this pink color and cover it up right on top. And remember to leave the darkest areas blank because we're gonna create a darker pink, and then the lightest areas light because we're gonna create a lighter pink color. We're gonna have 3 tones in this pink. And then I'm gonna move on to this pink flower over here. And I had put some lighter areas in there, so I'm just gonna try to avoid that light paint so I don't have to remix it. And just keep dabbing this middle tone color in, this pink flower. And then I'm gonna do the same thing as we move over to these 3 flowers in the center. So one of these flowers kind of comes up underneath and behind this flower. So just have a little bit more caution because we have more paint laid now to make sure we're not covering up other areas of the painting that we want to show through still, but at the same time, keep doing it in that impressionist style. Don't do long, smooth brush strokes. Just keep doing these little dabs of paint. So that was this flower here. And then we're gonna start painting this flower near the center. And this one somewhat overlaps this stem over here, so I'm just gonna lay paint right on top. And that one's gonna look something like that. And then we're gonna move down, and there's a pink flower behind this big white flower. So I'm gonna add some of that pink back here as well, which also overlaps the stems, but doesn't overlap the front white flower. And then I'm gonna move to this pink flower on the left corner. Sorry, my house phone's ringing. And we're gonna put in some of that pink color. So once we've done that flower here, we just have a couple more in this top left corner of the picture. I'm gonna add a little bit more water to my paint here, and I'm gonna start drawing this little pink flower in the back. And then we have this top one over here. And if you're noticing that your pencil sketch isn't quite accurate to the placement of the flowers as you're painting in more, you can adjust and your lines can totally exceed the limit of your pencil. And then I'm gonna get this little guy down here, which overlaps the stem a little bit. And those are all of the pink flowers in the picture. So that's our middle tone for the pink flowers. The next thing we're gonna do is create a dark tone for the pink flowers. So that's gonna be a little more red and a good amount more blue. And it's this darker purple color. And you can test it on your page. This is pretty much exactly the color you're gonna want, this dusty mauve purple. And so then you're gonna start placing that in those blank areas that you left for dark shadows, or just wherever you see it in the flowers. This is gonna continue to give them dimension. So again, I'm gonna work from the left to the right of the picture and just start dabbing this color in. Acrylic dries so quickly, so you don't really need to worry about your colors mixing together. It's usually dry within like a minute or 2. So since we're working from the right side of the picture to the left side of the picture, all of the things on the right side dry before we get back around to it. So I'm gonna add in, I see some shadows in this flower, some in here. And as you're painting these, they kind of have like a crescent shape to them because they're replicating what the petals look like stacked on top of each other. So we're gonna create that like crescent look. And just continue to add this wherever you see it. Or if you see empty blank areas in the back, you can add some of it in there too. So it's gonna look something like that. So finally, we're gonna create our lightest color of this dusty rose, and we're just gonna take a little bit of this off to the side, add a little bit more red to it so it's not quite so purple, and then add a lot of white. So it's a really light, dusty color, and you can test it on your picture again. So this is going to go in a lot of areas that I left space for it. Usually the tips of the petal are closest to the light source, so the tops of the petals are going to be what have lighter patches on them. Which is why near the center of the flowers I'm adding a little bit more of this white color. Add some more down here. If the live video ends up cutting out because we run out of time, I'm just going to save the video and then hop back on to finish up if we haven't gotten around to the background yet, for those of you who want to do that part as well. So it's going to look something like this at this point. Once you've done that, another really important part is to create this orange color that's in the center of some of the white flowers. So that's going to be a touch of red, a touch of yellow, and then the tiniest bit of blue. We're not going to add any white to this color. And blue and orange are opposites on the color wheel. They're opposite complements, which means they're going to create brown when you mix them together. So this is kind of like a brown-orange color. So I'm just going to add some of that in to the little dots in the center of these white flowers. And there's only a couple where it shows up, so I'm just going to add it in. So after you do that, you're going to take pure white, create a separate section for it. Don't just grab directly from the pile, because you're going to add a little bit of water to it. And we're going to add this to the portions of the flower, of the white flowers that don't have any paint on them yet, that we left blank. It's just going to be pure white, because these are pure white flowers. So wherever you left it blank, just add some of these white paint in, and make sure it's like pretty thick. You can add water to it, but just keep it pretty thick, because the highlights are always supposed to be the thickest on your painting. So your flowers are actually mostly done at this point. Our next point of focus is just going to be the background and the mason jar, which hopefully we'll be able to finish up in the next 10 minutes so that the live video doesn't cut out. But we're going to start with the mason jar. At the bottom of the mason jar, we have a gray-blue color. So I'm going to start mixing that. Over here where we had mixed our lighter stem color, we can just mix on top of that if you're running out of area on your palette, because the colors are pretty similar. So we're going to add a little bit of blue. We're going to add some yellow, and we're going to add some red, almost equal parts of each. And so it's going to be a weird brown color, but then we're going to add a good amount more blue to create a gray-blue. So once we make that gray-blue color, we're going to add white to it. And then we're going to have a light blue-gray. This light blue-gray is going to be in these little darker areas in the background of our mason jar. So where we drew that rounded bottom part of our mason jar, we're going to take this dark blue-gray color and put some of that in there, so you can tell it's in the background because it's darker. And same thing, near the front of our mason jar, we're going to put some of that paint in there as well. And then the area where the water overlaps the stem also has some of that dark gray color in it. So we're going to plug that in there too. You want some of the stems to be covered by this paint, but some to show through. That way it gives the effect of glass, because glass is clear and water is relatively clear as well. Very translucent. So it's going to look something like that at this point. So your next step is going to be adding slightly more blue and a good amount more white to this color. add a little bit of water, and then this is going to fill in some other areas of our mason jar. So this bottom part here is this color, this gray blue color, and just fill that in wherever the stems aren't, for the most part, or wherever it's not pure white, which is like the glistening glass, the reflection of the glass on top. And then it's also a little bit in the background. So wherever you see this gray, lighter gray color, just add it in. I see it a little bit going up the sides of the mason jar. I see it behind some of these stems. So it's gonna look something like that. So once we've done that, oops, if you spill water on your picture, you can just dab it up with your paper towel. Once we've done that, I'm gonna add even more white and even more blue. So it's more of a pale blue color now. And I'm gonna add this also in wherever I see slightly lighter spots or slightly more blue. I'm just gonna add this in to some different areas, give it some dimension and shape. There's also like a peachy color showing through the glass because that's the ground beneath it. So in order to create that peachy color, we're gonna get a little bit of yellow and a little bit of red, and we can actually mix it in with our little white spot we had earlier. If you still had that over here. If not, just add a little bit of white to it. So that's yellow, red, and white. And then we're gonna add a small bit of blue to it. And mix a good amount of this color because we're gonna add it to the floor underneath the mason jar as well. So I didn't quite mix enough, I'm gonna add more. So I would say 1/3 red, 1/3 yellow, almost a third white, and then the remaining just a tiny bit of blue. You can test that color. And then just start adding that in because that's the reflection of the floor behind the glass, what's showing through. It's in a couple different areas. Mine doesn't quite have enough blue in it, so I'm gonna add a little bit more blue to it. And then I'm just gonna start brushing it in to the ground in that same way. And this part you can do pretty quickly. We're just gonna add more color on top of it, so to give it that dimension. So just start plugging in this tan color in the background. Wherever you see it. There's some darker shadows along this area, so I'm gonna leave that area blank. But on this left side of the image, we have a lot more of this lighter tan color. So we're gonna fill that in. And if you have to come back to this part after the live video ends, you can finish it up on your own, just because we only have a couple more minutes until the live video cuts out. So that's gonna look something like that. And then we're gonna add a little bit more blue to the color to create the shadowy area, that cool shadow area. We can test it, and it should be pretty accurate if you just add a little bit of blue to it. And then we're gonna bring that underneath the mason jar and in these blank spaces over here, and just keep adding it in wherever you see this darker color. And there are some shadows on this side as well, so you can add those in too. So once we've done that, I'm gonna let you guys finish this bottom part on your own later, but we're gonna focus on the mason jar again. And we're just gonna get some pure white from our palette with a little bit of water and fill in whatever areas aren't already filled in our mason jar. Or wherever you think that maybe you added too much of the color, you can add pure white too. And you can overlap the stems in some areas, because that's going to give it the look of like glass reflection overlaid on top of the stems, which looks really cool. So again, just be filling it in with this pure white, and try not to leave any white patches left over in the background. You can add some horizontal little dabs too as well when you're creating this look. And then one more thing I'm gonna do, just to really give it that blue tint of water, is in this left area, I see some bright blue. So I'm just gonna take pure blue, which is gonna look pretty dark, and add a couple little bits into it, into these contrasty areas. Give it a little bit of dimension. I'm gonna add some in the bottom. Even though it's not really this dark in the picture, it just gives it like a really pretty contrasty look. So I'm gonna add that wherever I see darkness, that pure blue. So I'm gonna let you guys catch up to this area. The video is going to cut out any second. Then I'm gonna start the live again, and we're gonna work on the background when I restart the live, and then any final details on this part. So if you guys want to finish up the painting with me, so I'm gonna give you guys a second to join. And I'm trying to join on my laptop too, that way I can just see that you guys are following along. Okay, cool. I hope you guys are having fun with this. I really want to see what you guys' pictures look like afterwards. So totally send in pictures. Hi, Christy. Hi, Ami. So I hope you guys are enjoying this workshop so far. We're going to work a little bit more in the ground and the background, and then again, some final details on these flowers. So I'm going to wait until everybody else who was on the last live video hops on. I think there were like 8 viewers. So once everybody hops on, we're gonna finish up working on the rest of this painting, just because we didn't finish it in the 1 hour. Okay, so for those of you who are already on here, since we have a lot more time now, since I decided to just start a second part to the live video, we can continue to work on the floor down here. There's actually some lighter tones in the floor that we need to add in. So if you can manage to find that color that we had originally created for the floor, you can work with that, or you can make it new. I'm just gonna make a new color for it. So I'm gonna add some red and some yellow and some blue, equal parts, just 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and then we'll work from there. And then it needs a little bit more red after doing third parts, and a little bit more blue to give it more of a gray look. So once we've mixed that color, I need to get a little bit more white out on my palette. If you guys need to add additional paint throughout this workshop, just continue to do that. So then we're gonna add some more white to this color. A pretty large amount of white, like as much color as you made, you're gonna add an equal amount of white to it, and then test it on the ground. And I'd say it's even a little bit lighter than that, and potentially has slightly more yellow in it. And test it. All right, so that was pretty close. I'm just gonna start adding that color in to the ground. You don't have to 100% trust your printed picture for colors. You can make colors a little bit more vibrant, just because sometimes printer quality isn't as rich. So we can adjust these colors, and you can adjust them as you see fit, depending on what the quality of your picture printed out as. So I would just continue to dab this color in. I see a light patch on the side of this vase and behind it a little bit, and some near the bottom on this other side. So I'm gonna add it in there too. And I would say you can even add a little bit more white to it to add one more tone. And just add a little bit more white in some areas of this lighter color. And near the bottom especially, it gets a lot lighter. And I'm using less the corner of my brush now and more the side of it to create kind of bigger chunks of paint. And make sure that's nice and thick and you're continually adding more to your paintbrush. You don't want this to be translucent. We want it to be as opaque as possible. And then this lighter color we can add to the back of the mason jar as well. And for the mason jar, in the end, a lot of our stems potentially got a little bit covered up through the process of adding more colors on top. We're gonna go through and add some more bright green through it just to show the stem's shape underneath. So don't worry if you're feeling weird about the way that that looks right now. Okay. So I am going to move to the background at this point. The background of the photo is subway tiles, but the little picture I created instead of doing subway tiles, I just used a lot of the same tones of the white, and I actually exaggerated them. So wherever there was blue shadow, I exaggerated that. So we're gonna do something pretty similar to this for the background instead of painting each individual subway tile, just because that would be pretty time extensive. And I made this one a lot cooler than I made this one. That was one thing I didn't necessarily love about it. So we're making this one warmer. So hopefully we'll even like the way that this turns out better. So we're gonna start by mixing some blue and some white. Pretty simple. And then maybe a tiny bit of red, because purple is a very common shadow color. And that is going to be this shadow back here. It's even darker than the color that I created, so I'm gonna add some more blue to it and some more red to it. Excuse my dog in the background. And we can test this on the paper. It's a little bit closer. I'm gonna add a tiny bit of yellow too, to give it more of like a gray color. And that is pretty close. So once you add a tiny bit of yellow, that should be closer to the color we're looking for. And we're gonna start layering this into the background wherever you see shadow. The shadow's kind of reflecting some of the shapes of the flowers, which is why there's like random areas of light coming through, because as the light source is shining through the flowers, there's little holes and gaps in the bouquet that allows light to creep through onto that back wall. So we're gonna leave some areas of the shadowed area blank. And continue to add this dark shadow color in. This back shadow here is pretty shaped to the shape of the flower, so we're gonna add some of that in there. And then on this other side, there's a couple places that just kind of have a slight bit of like color change to them. So I'm just gonna kind of throw some of this in here. Since I'm not painting the subway tiles, just for some contrast, I'm just gonna throw some of this darker color into the left side of the picture. So once we've done that, I'm gonna create an even darker shadow. I'm gonna use the same color, but just add more blue to it. And this is gonna look a lot more blue. That's gonna go in the areas of the background that look like distinctly blue in the shadow, which is around here and some near the bottom. And there's some of that blue color too coming in on the side over here. And then there's some also on the top right corner of our picture. I'm just gonna add a little bit on this side too, just for some contrast and some dimension in that background wall, since we're not painting the subway tiles. So once you've done this, I would take some pure white and then just take a tiny bit of our color that we mixed here and add it to the pure white. And once we've done that, add some water again, just as we've been doing, and fill this in for some of the lighter areas. If it looks too light, just pick up a little bit more of that color. You can test it too, and start filling it in. Now this is going to be really similar to the colors of the flower, which is why at the end we're going to take some pure white and apply it to the flowers again to just make them pop out from the background. And so this color I actually feel like has a little bit of warmth to it as I'm applying it. I just feel like it's a little bit warmer, so I'm going to add a touch of yellow to this color too. And you don't have to repaint everything, you can just add it throughout a little bit, just to give it some overall warmth. So just fill this in wherever you see it. So the backgrounds kind of take a while to paint in. Just keep dabbing that color in. Depending on the size of your painting surface, this might take longer or less time just because you're covering the whole surface. If you want to move to a larger brush, you can as well. I have a medium-sized brush, so I'm pretty content with it, but if you feel like your brush is taking forever to do this, you can totally move to a larger brush. And I'm pretty much putting this color wherever there's a blank space in the painting. So even as we're working on these flowers, as you see little patches of wall showing through, you can plug some of this color in between the stems and such. And then just continue to move across the page. And there's going to be some areas that are more of a stark white within this background. So in that case, we're just going to apply some white on top at the end. But for now, we're just using this kind of creamy gray white color. keep filling it in. And this area is pretty straightforward. I'm just doing it along with you guys, just for fun. I'm sure you could figure out this part on your own, but we're just gonna finish the painting together. So once most of the page is covered, you'll notice there's some bright highlighted more areas in the background. For those, I'm just gonna take some pure white and just add some of that in for that texture, that background, that dimension. This is not anything super specific, it's just adding in some dimension and texture to our background. And I'm just moving horizontally for the background for the most part with these little strokes. It's gonna look something like that. So once we paint the background in, we're gonna give our flowers some more attention again, just to make sure that they're really popping through. And the way we're gonna do that first is to create a dark shadow color for our flowers again, for our white flowers, which is gonna be some blue and some yellow and a tiny bit of red. And I'm gonna add some water to that. It's gonna be kind of like a pea green color. And I'm just gonna make sure that my flowers, I'm gonna add some more blue to that actually, that my flowers are really prominently in the front of this wall background because it's a pretty similar color palette to my flowers. Just by adding some contrast in there. You can take this green color and use it for stems as well, not just the flowers. So if some of your stems have kind of like lost place, you can plug those in, even in the mason jar. So this dark green color is really just helping make sure that everything is visible, that maybe got hidden behind some of our other strokes in the process of this pretty like fast style painting. So wherever you see it, add this shadow in. And then I'm gonna take pure white again, and I'm not even gonna add any water to it. I'm gonna leave it really thick, and I'm gonna use that to make my flowers appear to be on top. So as you can see, there's a pretty thick layer of white paint on my brush as I'm doing this. And this is gonna be the brightest areas of my white flowers to just make them appear like they're on top of everything else. Don't cover up all the detail you did, just use this to really bring some light into it, because that's what Impressionism focuses on. It focuses on light and where we're getting that light from and where that light's located. And our light sources are always going to be thicker. So wherever these flowers are the lightest, lay that really thick white paint on top of them. We're going to do the same for the pink flowers, but with a pink variation of white. So these are gonna start to feel like they have a lot more dimension in them, especially in person. They're gonna pop off your page and have some really pretty texture, which is really fun. This same white color you can add a tiny bit of to the mason jar. This isn't necessarily there, but this is just gonna give it the effect of glass, is to do some vertical little strokes and then a couple horizontal ones. And that's just gonna give it the look of like glass overlaid on top of whatever we painted. So you're just gonna continue to work on this. And then we're gonna move back to these pink flowers, and we're gonna take some white and add just a tiny bit of red to it, to where it's almost a pure white, but with a touch of red to it. So it's pink, very light pink. And we're gonna make that really thick as well and lay that in a couple areas on these pink flowers to make them hop off the page. And then the last thing we're gonna do on these flowers is re-emphasize areas of contrast. So we're actually gonna create darker colors again. So we're kind of coming back and redoing some of the things that we did earlier, but it's just after doing the background and working on it for a while, you notice some areas that could use some adjusting. So this is just gonna be pure blue and red combined to create a really dark purple color. And wherever you see the very darkest areas of your flowers, you're gonna add that color in. And this is really gonna help them start to pop off of the page. This doesn't have to be as thick as the light parts. It could be a little bit thinner. But wherever you see dark areas in your flowers, you're just gonna move around your page and add little dots of this in. Can't wait to see what you guys made during this time. I'm really excited to see how you guys followed along. So at this point, it's gonna look something like this. So I think these are turning out really good so far. If you want to just add like a little bit more fun pops of color, you can take some pure yellow and add little bits of that into your white, and it'll just give it a really bright, vibrant look. It's not necessarily like in the photo reference, but again, we're focusing on like light, and yellow would be considered a light tone. So near the white areas, if you want to add like little dots of yellow in there, it can really make these flowers pop off of the page and have a lot of contrast from the background, which will be beneficial. This is optional to add a little bit of yellow. I like the look of adding colors that aren't necessarily there sometimes. I just think it can give the picture a more personalized look based on like your style and what you see. So I would say one last thing to do is just create a really dark color to add into the stems if you want, which would be mostly blue and a tiny bit of yellow. Like the darkest blue that we've created thus far. And it can even have a little bit of red into it, which will make it look even darker. And I'm just gonna add that back into some of the stems to make them pop forward and have contrast. So wherever I see really dark areas, I'm gonna go through and add this darker color too. And I'm just gonna add for fun like a couple more leaves popping off some of these. You don't have to do that, but if you feel like there's an area in the composition that's lacking a little bit, this was totally just a random vase of flowers in my house I took a picture of for this reference photo, so you can just kind of play with it a little bit. So there's one last area of this picture that we didn't do, and that's this little side wall over here. That can be totally up to you if you want to make it the same as this background, or if you want to make it this like minty green gray wall color. I'm just gonna make it the same as this background, but because of the way it's shaped, there's like a little bit more shadow on this side. So I'm just gonna make it more similar to this right side of the painting in this little bracket over here. So if you guys remember, we added some blue, a little bit of red, and some white. To create that. And I'm just gonna start to fill it in. in the same way that we filled in the rest of the background. You guys can come back to this and just continue to work on your flowers. I'm just giving you guys a little bit of reference for what you can do with this extra space where the counter ends and the wall transitions. And it's okay if this line isn't perfectly straight. It's okay to have some marks kind of like overlapping. It'll just add to the character of this piece, because that's what this piece is all about, just like character. Your brush strokes, you as an artist. And then I'm going to add a little bit more white to my color. And overlay that. Again, since we're kind of making up this background, we're not copying the exact background. It can really be whatever you want it to be. Just make sure that you don't make it all one color. It's kind of boring. So just add in some variation of tone, where there might be more light or less light. And then I like this color, so I'm just gonna put it in a couple areas throughout the background of the painting to tie it in a little bit. So you guys should be nearing the end of this painting. It is going to look something like this when you're complete. So I hope you guys enjoyed this workshop. I hope you guys feel proud of the work you made. I would really love if you guys could send in photos or post them to your stories of what you created. That way we can potentially post them on our Instagram or repost them and just see what you guys worked on in general. So thanks for all of you who tagged along the whole time. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, this was super duper fun. So I'm gonna stay on for a couple more minutes if you guys wanna add a couple questions below. If you have any questions, I can answer them or show you guys how to do something again. So I'm just gonna stay on. Thanks, Amia. But yeah, for sure. I hope you guys had fun. Yes, I'm so glad. This was really fun for me too. So I'm glad that you guys all followed along and enjoyed it. I'm gonna hop off in just a minute, but yeah, you're welcome, guys. It was really fun. All right, so I'm gonna be ending this live stream. I'm gonna keep it on the story for 24 hours so you guys can come back to it later if there's any part that you wanna rewatch. But yeah, this was fun. All right, have a good rest of your day, guys. Thank you for your time.